I'm muted.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Nebraska Farm Bureau's legislative issue update meeting, the first one for the year. My name is Jay Ferris. I'm Director of Grassroots Programs for Nebraska Farm Bureau. Just to give you kind of a little bit of an update of what we're going to do this evening and kind of how this will work. We are planning we have Anthony Arts, our Assistant Director of State Governmental Relations, and also Jordan Dukes, our National Affairs Director, that will be giving presentations on some state and national issues and what's going on from Farm Bureau's perspective. We will have the ability for those of you on the webinar to ask them questions. There are two ways to do that. One, if you have a microphone available on your computer, you can simply raise your hand. I will see your hand raised, and I will unmute your microphone so that we can hear your question being asked. You can also ask questions in the question box. You can type those in. And I see Dave Nielsen's already asked a question that, Jay, I hope you guys are more interesting than President Obama. Well, I certainly hope we can maybe accommodate you there. We'll see what we can do. Dave, I'll ask you after the presentation if you wasted your time here and wished you were listening to President Obama this evening. So with that, again, if you have a question, please type it in or raise your hand. We will unmute you. Also, I just want to reiterate, I don't see anybody that is on a phone line. There is some confusion there once in a while. You can dial in, but it is a toll call, so you would be charged that, and we don't want anybody to have unnecessary charges. So hopefully everybody can hear us just over their computer speakers. With that, I think we will go ahead and get started with the state portion. And Anthony, if you want to go ahead and take over.
All right, thanks a lot, Jay. I assume that you can hear my voice coming through?
Yep, you're coming through loud and clear.
I hope everyone is having great. Thanks. Hope everyone's having a good evening. So tonight what I'm going to do is focus on some of the priority issues that have come up and that we will be working on this legislative session. As I'm sure everybody is aware, senators came back to Lincoln to kick off the 2014 legislative days like normal. In total, there was 460 new bills that were introduced this year, in addition to those that were carried over from last session. And on January 21st, senators began holding public hearings on the new legislation that was introduced. So far, in relation to public hearings and also general file floor debate, it's been fairly quiet for agriculture so far. But what I'm going to do tonight is just focus on some of the top issues, beginning with obviously the issue that's been sort of front and center for the last little over a year now, and that would be tax reform. As everyone knows by now, the legislature formed a 14-member interim tax modernization committee that traveled around the state and garnered public input on how our tax system here in the state of Nebraska could be made better. And out of that study, they put together a final report that they issued in the middle of December that included the items that they had identified as prime for affecting tax reform, making our tax code more modern, more competitive, more equitable. We were happy to see that included on that list were a couple tax issues that Farm Bureau has long been advocating for, those being the reduction of the ag land valuation ratio from 75 to some lower percentage, and then also the removal of the sales tax on agricultural repair and equipment parts. So starting off with what is going to probably be our top priority this session, that is legislation that would effectively reduce the ag land valuation ratio, the percentage of the assessed valuation that can be subject to a property tax, reducing that percentage from 75 to 65%. There have been 3 bills introduced this session that I would consider probably the major bills that could make this change. One was LB 670, introduced by Senator McCoy, who of course is running for governor. Another one is LB 721, introduced by Senator Jansen, who also is running for governor. And then the third, introduced by Senator Tom Hansen of the North Platte area. At this point in time, Farm Bureau policy is obviously supportive of any legislation that would help to decrease the property tax burden for farmers and ranchers. That being said, though, we have worked more closely with Senator Hansen in the preparation of his bill. What his bill would do is reduce the ag land valuation ratio from 75 to 65% over the course of 2 years to sort of help phase in the change. Additionally, I want to note that there are two bills, LB 101 and LB 145, that do the exact same thing. Well, LB 101 would do the exact same thing. LB 145 does the same thing for the purposes of school district property tax only. Those bills were carried over from last session. They're still in the Revenue Committee, and Farm Bureau still supports those bills. However, we do welcome the opportunity to have new public hearings on the bills that have been introduced this session to decrease the ag land valuation ratio, just given the fact that since the introduction of the 2013 bills, they've had this tax modernization committee. The Department of Revenue has come out with new statistics in regards to the property taxes that were assessed from 2012 to 2013. In fact, the numbers are fairly recent, but we found out that from 2012 to 2013, ag land valuations statewide rose by roughly 23%, and the property taxes paid by agricultural landowners in the state of Nebraska now total roughly $892 million, or in other words, 26% of the total property taxes paid by all property classes in the state of Nebraska come from are assessed against agricultural land. So we will be watching those bills very closely, working hard with the senators to try to get this change pushed through. Additionally, there's been bills that have been thrown out that would infuse more money into the property tax credit program. Of course, that money is distributed to all property classes, all property owners in the state, based upon the percentage of value that their property contributes to the total value in their counties. Those bills are LB 669, introduced by Senator McCoy, which would of a multi-purpose vehicle hitting a lot of different aspects of tax reform. That would increase the amount in the property introduced by Senator Pete Persh, who's of course running for state auditor, and that would increase the amount appropriated to the property tax credit program by an additional $115 million per year. So that would bring the total available for distribution each year, assuming the original distribution stays the same, to $230 million per year. And being one of the largest property owners in the state, ag would obviously benefit from those changes. However, you don't hear as much momentum sort of around the idea of more money into the property tax credit program. More of the momentum seems to be caught up with reducing the ag land valuation. The final property tax, or the final tax reform measure that we'll be focusing on this year, is the removal of the sales tax on ag machinery and equipment repair and replacement parts. This is obviously something that Farm Bureau has been working on for a long time. Nebraska is on something of an island in its treatment of ag repair parts. It's one of only 8 states in the country that continues to tax them. All of the other states around us do not tax these repair and replacement parts, with the exception of Wyoming. And this has effectively created a situation that places Nebraska farmers and ranchers at a competitive disadvantage and leads to border bleed and the relocation of equipment dealers and loss of jobs in their state. This message came across loud and clear to senators this summer when they were doing their study. We've continued to lobby them pretty aggressively on this issue, and we were extremely happy. It was carried over from last session in the form of LB 96. Last Friday they discussed it, all 49 senators on the floor, and advanced the bill onto enrollment and review initial in a 44-0 vote, which such bipartisan support for a bill anymore is something that's somewhat unseen in the legislature these days. So good news on that front. Additionally, there's many other dynamics obviously involved in the tax discussion, including, of course, the governor, who basically sort of stayed out of things for most of the interim while the legislature was conducting its study. However, a couple weeks prior to the session beginning, the governor held a press conference at which he basically unveiled his vision for tax reform in Nebraska going forward into the 2014 session. And that's basically a two-pronged vision. One is to reduce the ag land valuation ratio to 65%, and the other aspect would be to reduce the income tax rate on the highest income tax bracket with the goal of trying to draw more high-paying jobs to the state of Nebraska. The number that the governor placed on his package or proposed package would be roughly $500 million in tax relief over the next 3 years. On the political side, things are obviously tricky, as they always are. In terms of the Revenue Committee, we feel fairly certain that Senator McCoy, Senator Hansen, there's still question marks regarding the other 4 senators on the committee, and we'll have to just continue to work with them, talk to them, and try to answer any questions that they may have in regards to reducing the ag land valuation ratio. There's obviously the dynamic at play in the body that deals with senators who tend to be higher spending senators versus those who like to keep the state budget in check and even maybe cut it. And we also are seeing somewhat of a divide grow up between ag land property owners and residential property owners, where we're hearing questions, if ag gets a break, why can't homeowners get a break as well? And so these are some of the questions we have to try to answer. On the income side of things, there's obviously some momentum around cutting the top rate, as well as providing an exemption for retirement and or retirement income and or military benefit income, exempting that from state income taxation. And then, of course, at the end of the day, the X factor in everything is how Senator Chambers will react. He has a number of priority issues this session that he's very fired up about. They have nothing to do with taxes, but what they do have a lot to do with is him taking up time and preventing some of the bills that we'd like to see come to the floor for discussion being unable to come to the floor. Some of his issues are like the removal of the mountain lion hunting season, the expansion of Medicaid, prison reform, repeal of the in a 60-day session. I've kind of touched on this already, but we're obviously doing quite a bit to meet up and sit down with individual senators to try to help to answer any questions they have regarding the reduction of the ag land valuation ratio. We're also developing an information piece, kind of a graphically accessible, easy to understand piece that helps to demonstrate the increasing burden that agricultural landowners are bearing in terms of paying property taxes in the state. This piece could be distributed to senators for educational purposes. Important date to put on your calendar, the major property tax bills, the ones that I identified right at the beginning, 670, 721, and then Senator Hansen's 813, have been scheduled for a public hearing on February 7th. And obviously we would like as many members as feasible to attend that hearing so senators continue to get the message that this is a major issue that farmers and ranchers feel very strongly about. Additionally, we'll continue to engage in negotiations with Revenue Committee members, the governor, and other groups. There's obviously the state chamber looms large in terms of state politics, and they're very they feel very adamantly about trying to reduce the state's top income tax rate. And so how everything comes together into a final tax relief, tax reform package will be very interesting and might make all the difference in terms of what's contained in that package and in terms of the senators that you can get to vote for that overall package. Moving on to the second huge issue this session, and that is water funding. Obviously, there was a water funding task force that, similar to the interim study conducted by the Revenue Committee, traveled around the state garnering input about the different water projects, being educated on the different water funding needs that existed in the state. And everyone sort of was waiting with bated breath to see what the task force would ultimately come up with in terms of providing the substantive legislation to basically transfer appropriate funds towards these water funding efforts. Originally, in the report the task force had come out with, the revenue enhancement mechanisms that it recommended were very difficult for a number of different groups to support. These included a tax on ethanol, a tax on bottled water and soda, an 1/8% sales tax increase, a tax on fertilizer, and I feel like I'm missing one, but maybe it'll come to me in a little bit. And so from Farm Bureau's perspective, the tax on ethanol and the tax on fertilizer, the fifth one is a tax on gravel and sand extractions. From Farm Bureau's perspective, it was difficult for us to see supporting a tax on ethanol or fertilizer. And so we did meet with some of the members of the Natural Resource Committee to explain sort of our discomfort with those approaches. So ultimately, we are happy to see that the bills that were thrown out in the end did not focus on those revenue enhancement mechanisms. Rather, there's one bill introduced by Senator Schills, LB 940, that would provide a $50 million one-time transfer from the cash reserve. This cash is meant to basically prime the pump in terms of the water funding projects. The second bill, introduced by Senator Carlson, LB 1046, would appropriate $50 million a year into the future to help fund water projects. And this is meant to be more of the dedicating funding source that the task force originally set out to provide. Then a third aspect of the water funding discussion and reform was LB 1098, introduced by Senator Carlson and other senators. What this would do is restructure the current 16-member Natural Resource Commission and essentially turn it into a 27-member commission. 13 members would be elected by a, oh boy. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, we can still hear you, but we lost your
My screen.
lost your screen.
Not sure. Show my screen
There,
here.
you're back.
Am I back?
Yep. And Anthony, while I'm on here, I do have a question that came up on this topic. It is, does the governor think there's a water problem?
Sure.
Okay.
Does the governor think that there's a water problem?
Yeah. Yep.
The governor has basically challenged the senators and other interest groups that participated in.
Oh, now we lost your audio. Yeah, you're back now, Anthony.
Okay. So the governor has challenged the senators as well as the other interest groups that participated in the water funding task force this summer to truly articulate and sell the need of their water funding requests. He's basically explained that until that is done, they will have a hard time convincing the body as a whole or enough senators that their individual collection of projects are worthy of such large, I guess, state appropriations year in and year out. I don't think it's so much that he's saying, I don't think he's necessarily saying there isn't a water problem. He's more saying that from a marketing standpoint and in terms of convincing constituents and then thereby senators that this is really one of the most important uses of state funds going forward, that more work needs to be done. And if I don't hear anything else, I'll just continue on where I left off.
Yep, no, that would be fine.
Okay, and so I'll just tie up loose ends in terms of the bill that would restructure the Natural Resource Commission, make it a 27-member commission with 13 elected by NRD caucuses and 14 appointed by the governor. Obviously, we'll be working to make sure that there's representatives from agriculture in the range. There'll be agribusiness, and then groundwater, surface water, irrigation district representatives, municipal water district representatives, just a large swath of different water interests in the state. Probably sitting on this commission, it probably will look somewhat similar to the Water Funding Task Force, and its job will ultimately be like the gatekeepers in terms of the applications for individual projects that come in. They'll then decide how this money that's appropriated each year will then be doled out to individual applicants to assist in the financing of their water projects. Okay, moving on, I guess one more area, the water projects, just to kind of recap, would fall into 4 categories as originally identified when the Water Task Force was formed. These categories are infrastructure, integrated management, compact and agreements, and research and modeling. And then you can see some of the examples of the projects that might be financed through some of these funds if the bills are successful in passing this year. You know, dams, reservoirs, lake restoration, modeling, groundwater modeling, municipal water supplies. One of the huge issues that probably will be discussed somewhat on the floor of the session is Omaha's federal unfunded mandate to basically restructure their sewer overflow system. That's a $2 billion unfunded mandate, and so that will undoubtedly enter the discussion. So it's going to, the water funding discussion is going to be a really sticky one. Senator Carlson, of course, is going to hopefully lead the charge, and we will be supportive of those. Our policy supports the efforts of cash reserve transfer and general fund appropriations, and so we'll kind of see how the chips fall in this discussion. The final major issue that we'll be focusing on at the state level this year are trying to provide incentives or reducing the barriers to livestock growth in the state of Nebraska. The first bill, which was introduced last session by Senator Schills, is LB 550. That provides tax incentives to individual producers who choose to invest their own money in the expansion or modernization of their livestock facilities. These tax credits are provided through the Rural Nebraska Development Act, and they would be refundable tax credits that could be applied against one's income tax liability with certain caps in place. Of concerns raised regarding how the bill was structured at that time, which was a loan program to livestock-friendly counties who needed a little bit of additional financial assistance when it came to trying to make the infrastructure upgrades necessary to accommodate, say, a large dairy going in down the road. The way that issue was resolved was through restructuring the bill to be now a grant program administered through the Department of Agriculture. And livestock-friendly counties would now be eligible to apply for grants to help fund infrastructure development projects up to a total of $200,000 per applicant, as well as to apply for grants to undertake strategic planning and marketing studies regarding how those livestock-friendly counties might be able to do a better job of accommodating new potential livestock growth within their jurisdictions.
Anthony?
The second bill that was introduced.
Anthony?
Yes?
For some reason, the slide is not up to where you're talking with us. I don't know if there's something. I don't know what. I'm going to switch over to my screen maybe. We'll see if that.
Is that up to date?
It looks like it's frozen for some reason. If I go, there we go. Okay. Do you see my screen now, Anthony?
I do not, Jay.
Okay. See. Well, I think my screen is live.
But
Hopefully,
maybe you can just run your screen if everyone
yeah.
else can see it, and I can just tell you when to switch.
We'll see if somebody wants to shoot me the question to see if you're seeing my screen, which has a picture of Senator Shills talking about LB 550 and LB 941.
I can see it now, Jay.
Okay, and Jordan sees it also, so we're good.
The second bill that was introduced this session regarding livestock growth is LB 941, also introduced by Senator Shills. This bill would provide for a comprehensive study regarding how the state could do a better job at trying to grow its dairy industry. Obviously, Nebraska is falling behind Minnesota and Iowa in terms of dairy placement, and this is a big concern to the dairy industry. And so this study is a step in the right direction towards trying to help at least identifying the beginning steps for how that industry could potentially grow within the boundaries of Nebraska, and that study has identified a potential funding source for potentially more than one livestock growth effort, which would be an appropriation from the feed fund, which is administered in the Department of Agriculture that consistently runs a surplus. Okay, and you can switch then, Jay. Okay, and then the final small issue that I want to cover livestock growth initiative that we will be working on as an organization this year in conjunction with the Pork Producers Association is LB 942. This was also introduced by Senator Shills, who is the chairman of the Agriculture Committee. LB 942 would essentially provide for custom feeding arrangements for swine only between producers and packers by exempting packers from the ban on owning livestock in the case of swine only. It would not remove the ban on packer ownership of beef cattle and dairy cattle. This bill obviously was in part grew out of the discussion that our voting delegates had and SLPC had in regards to Farm Bureau policy that basically resulted in a language change that supported the removal of swine only from packer ownership bans. This is going to be an issue that we'll be working on very hard. We will be providing talking points to county leaders. We've already participated in a media call with ag media to sort of give them some information on the topic. There's information available on the website, and it'll be important that basically the number one reason why the pork industry feels that this is important is because of the opportunities that it provides to young farmers who are trying to return to the farm but feel somewhat barred by the huge capital constraints of strictly crop production. This is a way for them to basically engage in a form of livestock production with lower risk, or at least a share of the risks involved, and also somewhat of a potentially consistent income to sort of help them get started, return to the farm, get a foothold. And so, we're hoping that we can get young producers to show up and kind of tell their story when it comes time for this public hearing. And I think with that, I will wrap up my presentation on state issues and open it up for any questions if there are any.
Yeah, we do have a couple of questions, Anthony. First one comes from Mr. Jeff Metz, and his comment is he personally likes Senator Hansen's LB 813, but he identifies that the real problem here is the school district level levy. And so to really make a difference in property tax reduction as a valuation percentage for school districts need to be reduced to 60% or less for ag land. And his question is, does LB 145 have any support in the legislature at this point?
I think the answer to that question is, so the question is whether LB 145 has support in the legislature right now.
That is correct.
And I guess the way, okay, and so I guess the way I would respond to that is that at the public hearing last year, LB 145 was received a fairly favorable hearing, I think I would say. However, it was not advanced from the Revenue Committee last year. It still sits in the Revenue Committee. And in regards to the discussions that I've been involved in, and in regards to the comments that some of the major players in the tax reform discussion have made, whether it's the governor or members of the Revenue Committee or other business organizations or associations, I haven't heard anyone mention the reduction in the evaluation ratio for school districts only. And I believe LB 145 reduces it only from 75 to 65% for the school districts only. But I haven't heard that bill singled out as being supported more so than other measures being introduced that would reduce the valuation ratio for all property taxing entities.
Okay. Our next question came from Dave Nielsen.
Any more questions?
Yeah. Can you hear me, Anthony? There. Anthony, are you there? Okay, Anthony must not be able. Oh, are you? Okay. We have another question from Dave Nielsen, Anthony, and this one is, what kind of opposition do we foresee on LB 942? Expecting Farmers Union, they obviously have a history of not liking exempting packer ownership and Senator Chambers and others. Is there any talk on that, on what the opposition to 942 will be?
Yes. The answer is yes, and I hope you can hear me because I'm getting a lot of static on my end.
We can hear you. Or yes, good. We can hear you. In regards
to opposition on 942, you're dead on. Farmers Union will be opposing the bill, and probably looking at it from a standpoint of, they've generally they have opposed these sorts of things in the past, but I would say in addition to Farmers Union, you'll see some opposition from some of the small cow-calf folks who might be worried that this bill would assume them, but that just is simply not the intent at all. I mean, it's completely industry-driven, from the pork producers and just individual producers up. It's something that they've asked for, and so those are the two sort of areas of opposition that I've heard of so far.
Okay. Well, I don't see any other questions for Anthony at this time. We obviously will. Anthony, I think you're going to be able to stick on the line with us for the duration. So if there is any further questions, we can take those at the end as well too. I have just a couple of things on some updating everyone on some grassroots issues we're working on and some of the activities we're working on before we let Jordan go with national issues. But just want everyone to be aware that we are wanting to host county farm bureaus. If you would like to come in and spend a day at the Capitol, we'll have a special day for you. Simply put, it'll be a day for 4 or 5 of your county farm bureau folks to come in, get a tour of the Capitol, have a one-on-one meeting with your state senator or their staff to visit about issues. And obviously we have some state issues that are of the forefront that Anthony just talked about that we can visit with. Taxes will definitely be one of those. Also, with that, we do have the tax hearing that Anthony mentioned coming up a week from this Friday on February 7th is the hearings have been set for all of the tax bills that Anthony talked about. And we certainly want to encourage our Farm Bureau members to come to those hearings and show good support for helping to do something on property taxes in the state. While we're doing that, if you can't make it on next Friday the 7th, the following Monday, February 10th and 11th, is Nebraska Farm Bureau State Legislative Conference. So if you can attend either one of those, both would be great. But our legislative conference, we will be changing that up a little bit differently this year to where we will be starting at the Capitol. And so at the Capitol, we will have an opportunity where you will get to visit with your state senator one-on-one and share those views on the property taxes and how it's affecting your farms and ranches. So I would encourage each of you to do that. Well, that gets also into our Farm Bureau Act, or our Farm Bureau Agricultural Contact Team incentive program for this year, and want to just visit about that a little bit. What we're looking for is we'd like all of our FB Act members to take action on at least 80% of the action alerts that we send out. And currently we have a couple of action alerts that are live right now that I want you to be aware of. One of those is the RFS Renewable Fuel Standard. We have an action alert where you can reply to the EPA's proposed regulations on that, and that is good through this evening at 11:59 tonight, and then that will be taken down and they're closing the comment period for that. So if you haven't already done so and taken action to have your views heard on the RFS standards, please do so at the end of the webinar this evening. Also, and now the OSHA regulations, it's up on the screen. Jordan will talk more about that one, but that one we actually took down yesterday because there has been some movement on that one. But another one that will be going up after the webinar, and I have a chance to get it up, will be on the Farm Bill, and Jordan will talk more on that as well. But I want to just make you aware of those action alerts because we want you to get that 80%, the FB Act incentive program. If you can have an 80% response on the action alerts, have some contacts made with your elected officials, face contacts, coming to the legislative conference, coming to Farm Bureau Day at the Capitol, attending the public hearing, those type of things count for that. Also some contact with your federal officials. All of that qualifies you to earn a trip to go on a lobbying trip to Washington, D.C. next year. So want to see as many of our Farm Bureau members participate in or qualify for that that trip, and so make us really choose who, make it tough on us on who gets to go on that trip. The other thing, those of you on the webinar this evening, thank you for being on that tonight. We do have another one scheduled for February 25th, which is a month away. And then, of course, we want to encourage everyone in 2 weeks to come to the legislative conference and have another legislative update, so that we're going to try to do one of these about every 2 weeks, and we will continue to do those in March and April. We just haven't set the dates on those yet, so we'll kind of be in touch. So stay abreast of your emails, and we will try to keep you informed on those. The next thing that I want to talk a little bit about on our grassroots activities, and that's just the election activities. This year is an election year. There are 13 rural districts that are up for election. It's all of the even-numbered districts for our state legislative candidates. 9 of those 13 are open seats. So we have 4 incumbents. So the open seats are the ones that we really focus on and want, and obviously we need some input from all of our county farm bureaus on all 13 of those races, but in the 9 open seats we want to do definitely some sort of an interview or a forum process. So if you live in one of those counties that is having an election for their legislative district this year, expect to be contacted by Jessica Coulterman or myself, because we will be getting in touch with you on setting up some candidate forums for our district evaluation committees. In addition to that, there's also the races for U.S. Senate and for the governor, and Nebraska Farm Bureau is helping sponsor a couple of debates or forums for those. The one in Hyannis is actually passed. That was back on January 6th, and that was a governor's forum. Tomorrow night we're going to be in Gering for a U.S. Senate debate out at the Gering Civic Center. So any of you that are in that area and would like to attend, let us know. We will get you, we can get tickets for that. We have tickets. It is a ticketed event, but let us know and we'll make sure we get you a ticket for that. Also coming up on March 23rd, I believe, is a Sunday in Broken Bow. There will be another governor event that we will be helping host, and that will be a Sunday afternoon in Broken Bow. So stay tuned for all of those. It's good to see a lot of Farm Bureau members in attendance at those, because we know that the elections, that a lot of times makes a big difference on getting our policies implemented, is having the right people elected to make the decisions and to actually cast the vote. The other thing that I will mention, we are having an action alert that will be going out right soon after the webinar is over, that will talk about the Farm Bill, also the RFS standard, and also talk about the tax hearing next week, next Friday. If you want to come to the tax hearing next Friday, all we ask you, jot us a note, call us, let us know. We'll try to meet up ahead of time, maybe do something for lunch and kind of go over as a group to the tax hearing. So if you can make it to Lincoln next Friday, give us a little shout and we'll make sure that you're included in on that. So I guess any questions for me at this point before we turn it over to Jordan? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions for myself, so Jordan, you can show your screen and I'll let you take over.
All right. Thanks, Jay. Let me throw up the PowerPoint here. Well, good evening, everyone. I wanted to run through just a couple things very quickly here this evening. I don't want to keep everyone on here terribly long. Just very quickly to provide you all with a little bit of an update as to what happened at the AFBF annual meeting. We had two resolutions that made it through the process. One of them was one dealing with health insurance. As a part of the health insurance law, there was a new small employer tax credit that was a part of the new healthcare reform law. It was for small businesses, as the name says. However, there was a significant problem with the fact that while many folks could still write off the cost of, or at least a portion of the cost of, the health insurance that farmers and other small business owners could receive, that tax credit had a provision in there where it said that you would not receive the tax credit part itself. You would not receive that if your employees that you provided health insurance for were related to you or owned businesses, owned a portion of another business. And so obviously that affects a lot of farmer and rancher families. If you have a child or a parent or whoever that may be that is or big data, as it were, just feel free to ask any questions as we move forward on this particular topic. All right, if we can get it to move forward here. There we go. So I wanted to hit a little bit on the Farm Bill just because it's the topic that we've been dealing with for almost 2 years now. We had a kind of a resolution that happened yesterday evening. A deal was reached by the leaders of both the House and Senate Agricultural Committees. They released their draft or their conference report today. It's about a 900-plus page bill, nearly 1,000 pages, and I'll get into just very quickly what some of that looks like. But just as some political or some logistical end of things, the House will be passing. Hopefully, the Farm Bill will come to the floor on the House side tomorrow. I don't know if it's in the morning or afternoon. They're still, I think, working through that. I think it probably would be toward the morning, but they don't normally get started until later, and then they take a long lunch. But so that'll be tomorrow when the House votes on it. The Senate will be picking up their bill any time within the next 3 weeks, is what Harry Reid said yesterday and today. So we don't have an exact timeline on the Senate side of things, but again, the House will take up their bill tomorrow. The dairy provision continued to be probably the biggest sticking point that slowed this whole thing down over the past few weeks. They were able to work out an agreement on that, but that still was kind of the main issue. In terms of what's in the bill, I'm going to switch screens on you real quick and pull up a document. Hopefully folks can see this just a little bit. I'll zoom in a little bit more on the document itself here, and we can see that's way too much. So overall, the bill saves, I think, a substantial portion of money. The CBO came out with their score today. It doesn't save nearly as much as what some folks had maybe hoped for, but it does, I think, a decent job of trying to address maybe some of the budgetary concerns that some folks had. The $23 billion is an old figure. It's actually going to be closer to about $16 billion over 10 years is the savings. Nutrition was cut by about $8.6 billion. Commodity crop insurance, they trimmed a net $13 billion. That includes the elimination of direct payments. Conservation reduced by about $6 billion over 10 years. The commodity title, again, we got rid of direct payments and as well as acre, replaced them with some new programs, a shallow loss program called ARC. That provides shallow loss coverage for folks with a 14 to 24% revenue loss. The supplemental coverage option exists for producers who want a lower cost buy-up option on federal crop insurance above 85%. And then also an updated target price program, where as you can see kind of there very quickly what those updated target prices are: $5.50 for wheat, $3.70 for corn, and soybeans at $8.40. This was mainly given to the southern states, those southern commodities. On the peanut side and on the rice side, I would say that those target prices are pretty exceptional if you look at where current market prices are for those particular commodities. On the payment limit side, they did add, they do have a payment limit in there of $125,000 per person, or $250,000, and that's per couple for all farm program payments. That does not include federal crop insurance. That's just ARC and the target price program.
Welcome to GoToWebinar. Webinars made easy.
I think that's a win right there. Also important to note, there was a one-time base acre acre update that folks can do. That's not required, but you can have a one-time update, and you can also reallocate base acre. You could also do an updated. I'm trying to think. There's another portion in that there. Yeah, but that's kind of it on that one. So is there one-time update in base and yield, both actually. The conservation title, not a huge change, not a lot different than what we've been talking about for the past several years. The livestock disaster assistance programs, those programs were reauthorized. They were reauthorized retroactively back through 2012. We had been pushing for an increase in the payment limit for those programs. There was some talk of those payments. You know, the current program, or the program, was limiting producers at $100,000 in terms of a payment cap on all of those programs, which in terms of livestock doesn't add up very quickly when you look at the law.
Welcome to GoToWebinar.
And there's a little thing in there as to what they really did there. And if you have questions, you can certainly let me know. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint here, and we'll we'll go from there. Just real quick, the bill should really have little to no trouble on the House or Senate floor. There'll be some folks that vote against it, but it should pass. There was a King Amendment on animal welfare that was not included in this draft that would basically prohibit states from placing animal welfare restrictions on products coming in from other states. This targets California and the way they've been doing things. That was not included. That was a win for HSUS on this one. We were pretty disappointed that that was not included. We had also been told that the Spill Prevention Control Countermeasure Regulation, SPCC, would be fixed through the Farm Bill. The House Farm Bill included that. The Senate did not. We had kind of been under the impression that it was going to be included. However, they decided to stay away from some of those environmental regulatory things just to kind of keep the bill clean, and so we are kind of back to the drawing board on that one. We think we have another avenue, but it's going to take some work to get that done. And then last but not least on COOL, the fact that COOL was left in the Farm Bill led the cattlemen, the pork producers at the national level, as well as the American Meat Institute and other meat packing folks as well, and some other livestock groups. They opposed. They actively are opposing the Farm Bill now. We were disappointed to see that, but that's the direction they're going there. Going to move through real quick on OSHA. Hopefully folks have been paying attention as to what Senator Joe Hans and Congressman Smith have been doing on OSHA, but very quickly, in early December, there was a farmer in Holt County that contacted Senator Joe Hans's office to talk to them about the issue that they had. They were fined $132,000 for OSHA violations when in fact that OSHA has been prevented from regulating farms with 10 or fewer employees since 1976. Joe Hans conducted a floor speech on this on December 18th. Really the whole thing came down to a couple years ago in 2011. OSHA sent out a new directive to their employees which basically stated that that farms, it didn't really matter the size, but that grain handling and storing was considered separate from regular farming practices. And so if you dried grain or fumigated that grain, that was considered processing, and you would thus be subject to OSHA regulations. That's where OSHA came up with this idea that they can regulate on farms when they basically backed away from over 30 years of congressional intent. Senator Joe Hans sent a bipartisan letter to OSHA. They put some language in the omnibus bill, the spending bill that passed a few weeks ago, that prevented OSHA from moving forward with regulating smaller farms. And then on January 22nd, last week, OSHA announced that they were going to pull back and re-examine what they were doing in terms of regulating agriculture. We'll have to. I think I have to see it to believe it, but I think this is a solid step in terms of OSHA backing away from some of this. They're going to supposedly work with USDA to try to find a new level of, or come up with a new idea as to what to do or how to best approach this issue. But I think that they got the message. Congressman Smith also sent a dear colleague letter that he gathered 82 signatures. So both Senator Joe Hans, who really kind of started this thing up, and Congressman Smith have done a lot of great work for us on this. We're happy to see OSHA, as of right now, back away. Just very quickly, renewable fuel standard, like Jay said, comments are due to EPA by 11:59 tonight, so right before midnight. If you have not done that, please go on and fill out comments to EPA and let them know our opinion on the RFS. We were obviously disappointed. Basically, the proposal would set, they basically reduced the amount of corn-based ethanol in the overall standard. They reduced the total standard down a little bit, and that would basically cut corn-based ethanol to 13 billion gallons of production, well below the 14.4 billion it was supposed to have. Essentially, with one stroke of the pen, EPA cut around 500 million bushels of corn out of the processing supply. So we were disappointed, as you can imagine, in that. We expressed our comments today. Those comments will be posted on our website, and they'll go out for folks. You guys can take a look at them if you have an interest in seeing our comments on that. But our policy was discussed a little bit at the AFBF annual meeting. Our policy, the folks there decided to stay firm in our supportive of the RFS, and so we submitted comments today that said that, and we're asking folks to do the same thing as well. So that's a very, very, very quick rundown on some national.
Welcome to GoToWebinar, webinars made easy.
Are you there, Jay?
I am here. I'm having a few technical issues. Can you hear me, Jordan?
I can.
Okay. Yeah, so I am back now. So yeah, if there are any questions for Jordan, at this point I am not seeing any, but or Anthony. Anthony should still be on the line as well.
I am.
Okay. So any questions for either Jordan or Anthony or myself? Did just get the excellent discussion, Jordan, so you're getting kudos.
Okay.
So, once again, would like to thank everybody for being on, partaking in the webinar this evening. We are, as I mentioned earlier, planning on trying to do one of these webinars about every 2 weeks to keep you folks informed of what's going on in both Lincoln and in Washington, D.C. as best we can. And obviously, if there's anything in between those 2-week webinar time frames, please don't hesitate to give us a call at the Lincoln office, because we definitely work for you, and we want to be attentive to that and work for you and keep you updated and represented as best we can. There is a question here from Jeff Metz for Jordan, and his question is, has the COOL lawsuit been moving?
So I'm trying to remember which I'd have to maybe look for clarification from you, Jeff, in terms of which lawsuit you're addressing. Can we? Is he typing out a little response there, Jay?
Canada versus the United States.
Oh, the WTO complaint, yeah. So yes, it actually that complaint has been progressing, which was one of the reasons that the cattlemen and pork producers wanted to pull back and get rid of COOL altogether. USDA introduced their new COOL regs last year, toward the end of last year. We expressed some concern with them as well. Farm Bureau policy is that we support COOL as long as it's WTO compliant. We felt that the rules that USDA came out with were not WTO compliant, and unfortunately, we may see that come to fruition as we see the ruling by the WTO on our COOL program. And so I think there are still some, while it was not taken out of the Farm Bill, USDA still has some regulatory authority to do some things. There was some language added in that also required USDA to conduct a study on COOL, an economic analysis, as well as a trade analysis on COOL again, and provide a little bit more information. So yeah, it is moving, Jeff, but it's still, I think, in the works.
Okay, thank you, Jordan. Next question we have, this one's going to go to Anthony, and this is coming from Richard, and it is basically, shouldn't we be concerned that LB 942 gives too much control to the packers?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep. Hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Well, I guess my answer to that is LB 942, it does only deal with swine, and it is being requested by pork producers. At this point in time, the pork industry, for better or worse, has become relatively integrated in terms of how pork is processed. And really, from our perspective, it's providing marketing arrangements or contract feeding arrangements that probably will prove beneficial to producers who wish to engage in them, obviously completely on a voluntary level, and helping them to get a foothold, like I explained earlier. So given the fact that it is industry driven from the pork producer standpoint, that has not, I guess, been a concern that we've heard from pork producers who are I guess, requesting this change. And in essence, it's maybe a reflection of kind of where the industry is. When the original statute was put in place, poultry was exempted due to the fact that many producers were already engaging in these custom feeding arrangements with poultry packers. And so this bill is sort of a nod to the fact that maybe that's where the pork industry has come over the last decade or so as well.
Okay. Thank you, Anthony. Any other questions that we would have out there? Oh, here's another question. Is there any movement to have a per pupil payment made to districts that have no state aid?
The answer to that question is that there is no legislation that has been introduced to make that change, but obviously Farm Bureau policy was amended this year to support state aid being distributed first in a base amount based on per pupil cost of educating. So our policy supports that change, in addition to taking into account other needs that are reflective of this. But at this point in time, there's no substantive legislation that has been introduced, but I do know the Education Committee is going to continue to research the topic, and I would say in the next couple years you'll probably see more serious discussions about potential modifications to the state aid to school formula, and that will, most likely that'll come up as part of the discussion whether or not it will ever manifest itself into an actual legislative change. I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. Next question is to Jordan, and the question is, are there any cuts to the CSP within the conservation cuts, I believe is how. Yeah. Any cuts to the conservation security program?
It's actually called the Conservation Stewardship Program.
Stewardship program.
But
okay,
anyway, you're fine. Yeah, there were some minor cuts to the program. I don't think that they. I'd have to look again. I don't think they really affected the program at all, to be quite honest with you. I need to look at the acreage numbers in there again, but I don't think folks would see much of a difference in that. The main cut in the conservation title, came from a reduction in CRP acreage. My little chart, I've got my numbers on there on that Word document I had up here. There was a reduction in CRP acres, but really that's kind of been the main thing. They also consolidated programs. There we go. There's the conservation title. They consolidated programs, 23 conservation programs down to 13. But again, I think the major budget cut that we saw was this reduction from the current Farm Bill. The 08 Farm Bill could have a maximum of 32 million acres in CRP. And as you can see, by 2018, we're going to knock it down to 24 million. So from 32 to 24, that's a pretty substantial reduction in the program. I think a lot of that, you can say a lot of that maybe it's come out already. They only had 30 to 29 million acres in the program too. So, but I think that's where most of your budget reduction is. So CSP, I think, was pretty safe.
Okay, any other questions? I am not seeing any other questions at this point. So once again, I would just like to thank everybody for being on the webinar this evening. We do hope it was informative for everyone. And again, we are planning on doing another one of these in a month. But again, we would like to see everybody down at our legislative conference in 2 weeks, and then we'll try to do one about every 2 weeks or so throughout the year. So encourage others to get on within your county. So once again, thank you. Jordan or Anthony, do you have anything else before we close this evening?
Nothing for me.
Okay.
Me either.
And I did get a question here, will we have this webinar on site? And we did record the webinar this evening. We will get it up on our website tomorrow. Also, it will be on YouTube. If you go to YouTube and type in Nebraska Farm Bureau, you will be able to find the webinar there as well. And each of you being on the webinar this evening should get an automatic email from GoToWebinar with a link to where the recording will be. If you don't see that email, look in Newswire this week. We'll probably have a link to it in there as well too. So that answers your question there. We will have it online for you to watch this later, to tell others about it as well. So with that, once again, thank you everybody for being on the webinar and on the line this evening. We look forward to seeing you next time and seeing you out. And again, if you can make it tomorrow night to the candidate forum out in Gering, we encourage you to do so. It will also be broadcast live online, so you will be able to go to the Rural Radio Network. I believe they will be covering it online. And go to our website. I think we'll have more information where that will be carried live, so you can watch that U.S. Senate debate live from Gering, Nebraska tomorrow evening. So again, thank you everyone, and we will see you next time. So have a good evening.